Right. There we go.
Give me the fix right now. Give me the fix right now. This is an emergency. I'm begging urgently. This is a serious case. The way you're putting work on me, just like a surgeon when you operate that way.
Hi, folks. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining me. So, that would have been, 30 seconds of Marshall Montano's Remedy. I was looking for something that was, related to being unwell, something related to health, that sort of thing. But I wanted it to be a little bit on the upbeat side. I didn't want to start with anything too morose and somber. So thank you so much for joining me this Friday evening, because I know with restrictions removed and safe zones in place and many of you vaccinated, you can be out doing lots of other things. But this evening, based on the address to the nation that we would have had last evening, I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 virus. I have not spoken about it in a while. I think the last time I would have had any sort of conversation about it would have been several months ago, where, by that time vaccines were here, and I felt okay with over 1 million vaccines in hand, actually with 2 million vaccines, close to 2 million vaccines in hand. I didn't need to necessarily continue to be talking too much about COVID, because silly me, I thought that the majority of you would have gone out and gotten vaccinated. And because we have Johnson & Johnson and we have Sinopharm, two vaccines that allow you to become vaccinated in short order, I say by now, certainly by the end of August, the entire population is 1.4 million, and the adult population is somewhere about 1.1 million. So I say by now, 1.1 million adult Trinbagonians would have been vaccinated. But I clearly did not anticipate how resistant some of us can be. So now we're in a situation where we have, as of today, 2,061 deaths, and over 69,000 persons here have had the coronavirus to date. And today would have been 721 new cases, 720 new cases and 21 deaths. So I just thought we need to talk about it a little bit, but I didn't want to talk about it with respect to Trinidad and Tobago alone. I mean, yes, I'm gonna mention that from time to time, but this virus, as you know, has hit the entire world, and I have friends in various parts of the region who are intimately associated with the virus, and so I thought I would invite one of my friends for whom COVID was a real reality, like a serious, not just hearing statistics, hearing data. It's something that he would have had to deal with in a very intimate way. So I asked him, would he be interested, would he be willing to come on and have a chat with me, and he agreed to do it. So let me introduce you to my friend Daren Matthew-Ward. Hi, Daren.
Hello. Hi, Rhoda. Good night. How are you?
Good night. Good night. So, folks, Daren is from Antigua, Barbuda, two of the loveliest islands we have in the Caribbean. When I think of Antigua, I think of Richie Richardson. That's who I tend to think of, because he's one of my favorite cricketers. I think about being told that Antigua has 365 beaches, a beach for every day of the year.
This is true.
And now I think about you when I hear about Antigua Barbuda, because you are my most recent friend from Antigua. And many of my followers here would not necessarily be aware of it. Some of them are, but not all of them. That from time to time we do a link up on a Friday morning.
Yes.
Yeah, on a Friday morning.
On Observer Radio here in Antigua. Yeah.
We do a link up on a Friday morning in Antigua, and I come on via Zoom, and we have a really interesting conversation about various regional issues. We've spoken, I think, the most about COVID. That's what we've talked about the most. But there have been one or two other topics that we've discussed on your program. So, Daren, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to put you in the hot
My
seat.
honor. Thank you.
I'm going to put you in the hot seat almost immediately. COVID would have gotten to your shores when? When exactly did it hit Antigua Barbuda?
Oh. The best of my recollection, I would have traveled to the United States to attend my great uncle's funeral in February, early February of last year.
Right.
And at that time, they were already asking me if I had been to China in the last 7 days and all that kind of thing. And certainly it was an issue in the United States. By the time I came back home, this was in March of last year, I think COVID had pretty much reached our shores. And I think our first lockdown was in April. So it happened pretty quickly. I wouldn't have the exact dates in my head. I probably should because they were all seismic events, but that's the timeline I remember. My great uncle's funeral in February. In March, we realized that this thing was a lot more serious. Before when you had SARS and bird flu.
Right. So we had
Right.
SARS, avian flu. That's it. Avian flu
Avian flu. Correct. We thought that this was just going to be in Asia and it wasn't going to have any impact on us. But we found out pretty quickly that was not the case. And so by April, we were heading into a lockdown. And of course, it was like nothing I've ever experienced in my life.
So when you went into lockdown, what were your lockdown conditions like? Because before you get into it, let me share a little bit of our experience here. We would have had our first case the 12th of March. That's when the first case got here, and it would have been somebody working in an energy sector company who had gone up to Europe. So he'd gone to his parent company in Europe, and he was back in the country. And when he landed, by that time we'd already started to have protocols in place where we were saying to persons, if you feel that you have symptoms, present yourself to be tested. And it turns out I think him and his family, they were positive. So this would have been the 12th of March. When that happened, we pretty much, the then Minister of National Security would have indicated that we were going to be closing our borders. And that our borders were going to be closed by the 23rd of March, and so people had a very short window of time. I think it was like maybe 12 days, somewhere thereabouts. Wherever you were in other parts of the world, you had that time to get yourself onto a flight back into the country. And so by the 23rd, midnight the 23rd, we had shut down our borders and gone into a lockdown scenario. And there were about 40 something Trinidadians on a cruise ship out, I think in like out on the sea in the Caribbean, and they got themselves back to Barbados, and then from Barbados to here, and we had them in quarantine, and those were the first set of COVID patients that we had in Trinidad. The gentleman who flew in, and then some of the persons, the majority of the persons who were on that cruise ship. And thereafter, once we dealt with those positive persons, we managed to be in a situation where it was pretty much contained. We did not yet have community spread. We dealt with those persons. There weren't very many deaths. I think we had like maybe about 4 deaths in at the start. And then we had our second wave, and now we are on to our third wave. So what we put a parallel healthcare system in place. What kinds of things went into gear in Antigua, Barbuda?
I don't know if my memory is in terms of the dates specifically, is as sharp as yours.
That's all right.
But I do, I do remember. What I remember about the lockdown is the fact that we had to basically be at home for extended periods of time, for at least days at a time.
Is it that everybody had to stay at home?
Everyone had to stay home except for who were considered to be essential workers.
Okay.
All right. the the situation, I mean, some of us, certainly with my work, being a host of a news and current affairs show, I would have received a pass from the authorities. So I was able to go do my work. But by a certain time, I think like by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, we had to be back home. And this is 11, 12 o'clock in the day. So it was a situation where, of course, you were locked in. Supermarkets were closed. A lot of places were closed. We weren't able to go out and get things, so we had to stock up. And then when the supermarkets did open, they were open for limited periods of time. So you had to essentially get your shopping done by 11 o'clock because the supermarkets have to close 11 o'clock so that their workers can get home by midday, which was that lockdown period. And so it was just very strange. The place was quiet. I live near to the airport in Antigua. There were no planes coming in or out, right? Cruise ships had ceased. Of course, our economy is very dependent on cruise tourism. So it was just like the world had, our world had ground to a halt and economic activity had been curtailed considerably. It was just very strange. We did have to find ways of keeping things interesting and getting into habits that, or even not chores, learning things that we may not have ever done before. I mean, I learned to bake. I never really baked before
Never
because I
baked
had like,
before.
not really, not, but I mean, I would bake food like chicken or steak or pork chops or whatever,
So you learned to
potatoes.
bake what? Bread and cakes and stuff?
But that's right, bread. I baked bread for the first time. Did banana bread, and so as a community, in order to keep, our sanity, I
Same.
guess,
Yeah.
many of us would have shared, what we were doing, whether it was backyard gardening, whether it was learning to bake banana bread, which is my favorite because I love anything with bananas. I learned to bake bread, whole wheat and white bread. So these are things that you learn to do and enjoy doing because you realize, I think at that point in time, it sort of helped us to recognize what really is important in life, which is family and self-sustainability, being able to grow your own food, take care of yourself because you had no choice. All the conveniences would have been stripped away the way we had become accustomed to.
Right, because I was gonna ask you. You indicated that a lot of things were closed. Didn't they weren't
Right,
allowed to be open. They weren't open for long stretches of time. Did you all have any
correct.
issues at the start with shortages? Because we had, as soon as there was the announcement of the first COVID patient here,
Mm-hmm.
Trinidadians, because I think they were looking at what they were seeing on American
Toilet
television.
paper.
Yes, toilet paper. We had
Yeah,
people rushing to buy toilet paper. And I mean, like, every
yeah,
single time there was an announcement of something. So the first patient, there was a rush for toilet paper. The
right.
announcement of the lockdown, there was a rush for toilet paper. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand why we were rushing to buy toilet paper. But did you
Yeah.
have any of those things taking place?
We did, but I don't remember it being acute. I
Okay.
don't remember it being because I never had a problem getting toilet paper, for example, by way of example. Um, there were some shortages of some items, but it wasn't as widespread and significant as the United States. So I don't think it would be fair for me to say that the experience here was similar to what obtained in the United States, as you've just described.
What about
I
food?
think we fared it pretty well.
Did you have issues with food? I mean, were there issues where shelves seemed to be going light on certain things?
Sometimes, but not significant. Not, I wouldn't say, well, let me put it this way. My experience was not that way.
Okay.
And I don't think that I'm unique in that regard.
Does Antigua Barbuda have a high food import bill? Would you say is it
Very high,
right? It's because
very
it's
high.
similar here. We
Yeah.
a lot of what we consume we
Mhm.
purchase we bring in. So things like Lysol, that there were shortages on
Yes,
Lysol.
yes. Correct. We did have shortages of those. And
Lysol, bleach,
getting
alcohol. What about things like rubbing alcohol or a
rubbing
methylated
alcohol,
spirit?
sanitizer, Lysol, or any form of disinfectant spray, wipes,
Yeah.
those things, yeah, those things were, you had to basically line up to get these things, and if you really wanted to get them, you had to be early. So even though the opening hours were, or the curfew had ended at 6 o'clock in the morning, when you get to the supermarket at 6 o'clock, there's a line already stretching around the corner from the supermarket. So you knew people must have been breaking the curfew to get there for 6 o'clock
Did
or
you
before 6 o'clock.
did you have, or I was just about to ask, did you have any law
Yeah.
enforcement issues with the curfew? I mean, were people breaching the curfew in any significant
Um,
way?
there were those, you always have those who want to test the boundaries of the law,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't say that it was widespread. I don't think law enforcement, I mean, Antiguans generally, they say, they say Antiguans are docile people or we're very passive.
Mm-hmm.
And by and large, the population adhered to the curfew. So I don't think the police had significant problems. But there were a few, of course, who, really overdid it, and the police threw the book at them.
Okay. So one of my listeners is asking,
Mhm.
Ian Michael Joseph is asking, what is the present population of Antigua? Can you give me just a ballpark figure? Was it the population?
Our census is outdated right now, but the best estimate, certainly if you go on the CIA's webpage and you Google it,
Mm-hmm.
the estimates range from 95,000 to 100,000 persons.
Okay, all right. So about a hundred
Yeah,
thousand persons, give or take,
yeah,
thereabouts. And I was looking at
correct,
your figures. I saw that in terms of cases, you would have had overall about a little over 4,000 cases overall,
correct, correct. I'm going to try and pull it up for you just now, but we would
and
have had over 4,000 cases.
and about a hundred
We
and
would,
seventeen deaths in total.
correct,
Right.
correct,
That's what I
correct.
saw, because I saw 4,141 cases
Mhm.
when I looked at it earlier
Mhm.
today. Okay,
Yeah.
so did
Mhm.
your government, did your country do anything specific with respect to healthcare when it came to this pandemic? Because one of the things we would have done, and we discussed it on your program a couple of months ago, I talked
Right.
about us having put a parallel healthcare system in place so that persons who tested positive didn't go into the regular mainstream hospital system.
Mhm.
There were hospitals set aside just
Yeah.
for dealing with COVID patients. What did you all do rather?
In the initial stages, we really only had one facility. That's the Mount St. John Medical Center, which is now known as the Sir Lester Bird Medical Center.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened, whenever there was a wave and there was an increase in the hospitalizations,
Mm-hmm.
essentially a number of the services that the hospital would normally offer, outpatient services, certain procedures, all of that had to be suspended because of the COVID situation. So we did not at that time have a parallel system as you've just described. Subsequent to the initial months of the pandemic, the government did set up an infectious disease center, and they also set up another facility. There were at least two facilities that were separate from the main hospital, which were intended and are intended to address that problem. But I don't know if, certainly, I don't think the population is satisfied that those remedies or proposed remedies were effective, because one facility has never really functioned.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that they've ever had any patients because there's a shortage of nurses and other medical professionals to man that facility.
Right.
And the other facility, there were patients in that facility. That's a facility that was located at the old hospital, what we know as Halberton Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so it did have some COVID patients that were housed there. But in terms of having a strictly parallel system, as you've just described, with what obtains in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think I would be being unfair to our situation by saying we did not have that system.
Prior to the pandemic, your healthcare system
Mm.
is it understaffed? Is it a situation where generally you need more doctors, more nurses in your system?
I think our main weakness is nurses. We have a shortage of nurses.
Mm-hmm.
Almost any time I have an interview on my program with the chief medical officer or certainly the minister in particular, Sir Malwyn Joseph, he laments the fact that we have a shortage of nurses. And, the government would say that they really can't compete. Our nurses are very well trained. And when the United States and other developing countries come after them, when the nurses weigh, the pros and the cons, especially the economic factor, they go with the developed country offer. And so it's a problem we have. Doctors, we have a number of young, uh, fairly well trained, very well trained doctors who've been offered scholarships over the years, or families who've been able to afford their children the opportunity to study medicine. And so I'm not sure if the shortage of doctors is as acute as that of nurses. That's not my understanding.
So Avril Celestin is asking if you have a
Mm.
shortage of specialists. Do you know if there's a shortage of different types of specialists?
We could do with some more specialists, yes.
Okay, because
We do
that'd be the
need some
same
more.
everywhere, I think.
Yeah, yeah, we would need, because I have heard the minister who's responsible for trade and industry, I believe, I think in a charge that he would have offered to some new doctors that were coming back from, I believe it may have been Cuba. He said, don't rest on your laurels. Go away and try to specialize because we need specialists. And but it's getting a little better. It's getting a little better. We, instead of just having one or two or three OBGYNs, we have more. We have more urologists. We have more oncologists now. So it's getting a little better. But there's certainly some areas, if you get a particular sickness, you're going to have to fly either to Barbados, Trinidad, or the United States, or
To
Colombia,
to
or
seek
Cuba.
to seek treatment.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I get you on that. I understand that.
Hmm.
So how long did your curfew lockdown situation last for?
Ah, we're currently still under a curfew because by 11 o'clock we have to be home. So essentially, I think it's safe to say for what's it, almost 2 years now? Well, not quite 2 years,
But
shy
close
of
to,
2 years by a few
close
months.
to,
We're
close
close to.
to.
The curfew has shifted. Sometimes it's 8 o'clock, sometimes it has been 6 o'clock, sometimes it's been 10 o'clock, right now it's at 11 o'clock. When the numbers are less, the time out is longer. So right now it has been at 11 o'clock now for quite some time. And on the 23rd of December, the state of emergency will end and the curfew will be done away with completely.
Good. We just got rid of our state of emergency, but the thing is, even though we've gotten rid of our state of emergency, our numbers have not gone down.
Right.
Our infection rate has not gone down, and the number of deaths themselves, that has not gone down. It seems to be going up. So, of course, we are
Right.
bracing for new measures to be coming in place
Yeah.
pretty soon, right? I have no
Right.
idea what those measures are going to be, but bet your bottom dollar, as soon as I know what those measures are, if you need me to come and talk about them on your
I'll be sure to
program,
ask you. I'll be sure to ask
I will
you.
be there to talk about them on your program.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
how has how has the population there responded to the restrictions, the lockdowns, the curfews? What has the response been like?
Um, it's mixed, as you would expect. Some people are resigned to, look, we're in a pandemic, this is what it is, we have no choice, we just have to do as the authorities say, even though grin and bear it, basically. There are others who will find creative ways of skirting the guidelines and the restrictions. So you've heard and you've seen videos about the little private parties that may not be
Oh, you all had private
adhering.
parties? You all had private parties
Yeah.
too?
Yes, Rhoda. Yes, yes, yes. We love to party too. You think partying is a uniquely Trinidadian thing?
No, not at all. Not at all. You know,
we,
Trinidadians think
uh,
generally that they're the center of the universe, right?
I do know that. Yes.
Right. I know
They
that
say
you
God is
know
a
that.
Trini.
Right.
So my
Exactly.
Trini
That
friend says God is a Trini.
exactly, God developed here, right? That Mary had the
Right.
child here. She didn't go to
Mm,
Bethlehem. She came to Trinidad and she had the child here in Trinidad, and God became a
yeah.
Trini. And we think
Right.
everything centers around us. And we think that everything that happens in the world happens only here. We never think that
Right.
it happens anywhere else. So I am grateful that you, further north, Antigua
Yes.
Barbuda, will be able to point out to my listeners, you all had
Yes.
private parties too.
Had private parties too. You had those who, I remember one time a few people shared with me a video of what appeared to be scores, if not hundreds. Hundreds might be a slight exaggeration, but there were a lot of cars on one particular beach. Nobody was wearing masks. Uh, Folks were out cavorting, having a good time, music blasting, people drinking. There was no social distancing going on from the videos. And I think on one hand, people were upset and saying the police need to do their job, and this sort of thing. How could they not know this was taking place with all these cars in one place? And then on the other hand, you're talking about young people who've essentially been on lockdown for some form of restrictive situation or environment for the better part of a year and a half at that time. So there was some sympathy and understanding in some quarters, and then at the same time there was, we have a whole life to party. People should not be risking their life just to party and have a good time, and they were being irresponsible.
So I wanna ask then, the groups that have been resistant to restrictions, because we ain't started talking about vaccines or masks yet, right? But the groups that would have been resistant to restrictions, what are the features? Is it like a clear, distinct group, and it's the same group of persons that are anti-restrictions all of the time?
No, I think little pop-ups here and there. I didn't really get a sense that there was a particular group, well, in the main, that had always were getting in trouble with the law. There is a particular grouping that have been consistently protesting the government's management of the pandemic.
Okay.
They have a problem with the vaccines. They have a problem with the lockdowns. Their attitude is essentially, we got to live with COVID just like we live with cancer, just like we live with any other sickness. People are dying from other sicknesses. What makes COVID so special? I hope I'm not being unfair to them. I don't think so, because they told me something along those lines on my program. So basically, they have been protesting, but they have tried their best in the main to behave and operate within the corners of the regulations. Because, of course, they did have a bit of an altercation with the police, where the police fired tear gas at one time.
Okay.
And I don't think they want to experience that again.
All right, we're gonna get back into that group in a little bit, but let's backpedal a little bit to masks and mask wearing. Did you have any issues with people wearing masks and having to and did you eventually make mask wearing mandatory in Antigua and Barbuda?
From earlier clock, mask wearing was mandatory, hand washing was mandatory. Social distancing was encouraged and in many cases enforced. Of course, you have people in every bunch who is going to wear the mask on the chin, who's going to wear the mask on the forehead. They're going to wear it on the ear hanging down. They're going to try all kinds of creative ways because they will argue that they can't breathe properly in the mask. You're going to have those. But by and large, I think it's fair to say that the majority of people were positively responding to the guidelines by the chief medical officer and her team, and the other medical professionals who would have come out and been the face of this pandemic in terms of encouraging people to do the right thing, to protect themselves and members of their family. So in the main, people were well behaved, especially if they were in town and where police normally are. When you go to the countryside, where the police vigilance may not be what is the case in the town. I passed a few people playing dominoes and not a mask. Well, they have the mask somewhere on the table or wherever, but they're having their beer and they're slamming their dominoes and nobody's wearing any mask. I'm sure that's all over the Caribbean.
It's not. I don't think it's unique to you at all. It's we share a reality. So masks and mask wearing was not necessarily a big pushback area.
No.
Did you have, at the start of the pandemic, did you have people that were denying that COVID was even a thing? Did you have any of those challenges at all?
Yes. That I think it's fair to say that there's a significant, well, maybe not, well, I don't know how significant. So I'm not going to sound as though I'm an authority on exactly how many or a percentage, but significant enough that I heard from them every day on my show. They would cuss me, oh, COVID is not real. This is just a big play by persons, you know the names. It's just a concoction to try to control the world's population and other what I consider to be conspiracy theories. This is just something that was created in a lab to deliberately, uh, cause problems for the world and change the world order. You're familiar with the conspiracies. So there are those here who very much believed those conspiracies and those ideas and subscribed to those ideas. And sometimes it was very frustrating trying to convince people that this was no joke. This is a real virus. Never mind how it got out there, whether it was a lab, whether it was a pangolin in China, in Wuhan, or whether it was, I don't know, somebody ate something they shouldn't have eaten. Whatever it is, it's here, it's real. And so sometimes it was very frustrating because we do live in an age of misinformation. And unfortunately, everybody feels that they're an expert, and social media, being the empowering tool that it is, once you have a megaphone and you say something controversial, you get a lot of views and a lot of followers. You think you're onto something. And that's the dangerous thing about this pandemic.
So one of my listeners is asking if your government had to intervene to provide aid, grant, subsistence of any sort to persons when
Yeah.
the lockdowns came, because we embarked on a whole social support system for the COVID-19 period.
Short answer is yes. Both the Antigua Labour Party, Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, which is the governing party, and the United Progressive Party, they have both been engaged in social relief programs to assist their supporters who would have fallen on hard times. I know the unions also at one point in time, or more than one point in time, would have offered relief packages to their members. Also, the Rotary Club, I'm a member of the Rotary Club, and I know the Rotary Club would have worked along with some very good corporate citizens who were able to provide food feeding essentially parcels of food and vouchers for individuals to go to the supermarket and purchase food. And this program went on, I believe, till the end of the year. It went on for several months to the end of the year. The Lions Club also did something similar. So the government was not alone. They did their bit. The Ministry of Social Transformation would have offered food packages to individuals who they deemed to be in need. The various parliamentary representatives and of course the opposition wanting to make sure that they obviously take care of this. You know how the politics go.
I know.
It's not unique to Antigua.
I know.
So disparate groups would have done their part in helping to alleviate the dislocation.
Now, the politics that you are describing there, Daren,
Yeah.
is not the politics that takes place in Trinidad and Tobago.
What's that? What? Tell me.
Our politics here is different, is on crack cocaine. So you see how you can talk about how the opposite. Actually, let me ask you this more specific question. Has the
Hope I can
opposition?
answer.
I feel that you can. You sound like an observant guy. Has the opposition in Antigua Barbuda been cooperative with government initiatives?
In my view, they have been in part. For example, they have been, at least officially, been supportive of the vaccination program. All right? The political leader, he publicly took a vaccine. He has a public service announcement out there advocating, for people to get vaccinated. But on the other hand, the opposition did not support the government with respect to, they did not support the state of emergency. They didn't think the state of emergency was necessary. They thought that the public health regulations were sufficient to govern the behavior of society in the management of the pandemic. And so they thought that the state of emergency was a tool to control and stifle political behavior. They repeated it on my program this morning. And just recently in the cabinet meeting that took place this week, the cabinet made a decision to lift the state of emergency, and the cabinet note specifically said that the public health regulations will remain in place. People will still have to adhere to certain protocols and guidelines and restrictions. And the opposition, as soon as I read that sentence, I knew the opposition was going to pounce on it, because that is what the opposition has been saying all along. So I think the government is going to have some explaining to do of why the opposition was wrong. But not to stray from your question, the vaccine, the Prime Minister and his cabinet went down the road of mandatory vaccinations in the public sector and also in the private sector and in schools for those children who are eligible to get the Pfizer. And the opposition was dead set against it. They thought that the government should have tried going down the road of moral suasion, education, trying to entice or encourage, cajole, use what adjective you will, to encourage individuals to take the vaccine. But the government was saying, look, we've been educating for the last year, vaccines came out earlier this year, so for the year so far. And people have just been hesitant, and the government had to essentially, sometimes you have to crack a whip. The jury is going to be out on how the voters are going to see that. If the voters are going to say the government had the testicular fortitude to implement something that was politically unpalatable, which is force people. If you don't get vaccinated, you're not going to get paid. And so the risk is that people will resent you for that and vote against you in the elections. Or will they give the government credit by being decisive? And that's one of the criticisms the opposition has received, that they're not decisive. They're waffling. They're trying to have their cake and eat it. The voters ultimately will decide. But to answer your question, the opposition has been partially in support of some things, but certainly with respect to the state of emergency and the mandatory vaccinations, they have been dead set against it. And the voters will decide when the next election comes, which is constitutionally due in 2023.
What size of support in terms of the population does your opposition have? Because here our opposition has, I can tell you it in terms of numbers, not percentage. They have at least 300,000 votes guaranteed. And so because of because our voting population tends to be about 600,000 and change, right? At each general election. So whichever party wins, the party that wins tends to be a little over 300,000 in terms of the number of votes. So we have an opposition that has a clear, solid 300,000 votes every single time. So that's almost half of the voting population. And so you find that there is always a lot of tension. If they're not in support of something, they have a solid 300,000 persons who are going to say, well, no, we're not in agreement with this particular policy either. So from the very jump, COVID here was a huge political football. It's continued to be a huge political football. So in Antigua and Barbuda, how much of a political football has it been then? And I'm asking it to get a sense of, when the government comes with a measure, are people going to not support the measure because the opposition has decided they're not supporting it and they're in support of the opposition? That's what I'm trying to grasp.
Let me answer you this way. In my humble estimation, the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party is what we would consider to be a legacy party. It was the original party coming out of slavery, out of the plantation days and what took place in the 1920s and 30s. That was the original party. So they naturally have a built-in advantage numerically in terms of the number of people who they have a base of support that's larger than that of the opposition. The opposition essentially here in Antigua, the United Progressive Party, they are an amalgam of many of different political parties that have generally been in opposition to that legacy party. In the last two general elections. I don't have the absolute numbers with me, and
I'm not gonna kill you if
I
you.
can get that to you.
I'm not gonna kill you over it at all.
Okay, I hope not. I know you won't. I'm kidding. But yeah, the opposition has seen a decline in the number of persons voting for it. In 2014, they would have won in 2004. I mean, the Labour Party got a real thrashing in 2004. In 2009, the victory was narrower, and then in 2014, they lost the government. So in 10 years, the opposition lost the government. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons, at least right
No,
now.
you don't have
But
to. But let me
but
break down why
so just
Sure, go ahead.
well, just let me finish. So in 2014, they would have seen a decline in their level of support numerically. And then in the most recent elections, when the prime minister called a snap election, he did that deliberately. It was a tactical move because there was a split in the opposition where members would have left the opposition over a leadership battle. All right. And as a result of that, I mean, he was, I guess, being a tactical politician, and he would have called a snap election. And so the opposition support declined as well. So naturally, in terms of electoral politics, and if you look at it, the Labour Party has won more elections over the last 50 years than has the opposition in whatever name it's called. So from a numerical standpoint, the ALP does have an advantage. Okay? And so that would probably give you an idea of where your answer may lie, in that the government would have some advantages in that, even though the supporters may grumble, because it's their party, they're going to,
Right.
suck up and just go along.
I get that. So while
Yeah.
you might be a two-party system, the legacy
Mhm.
party seems to have more sway.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because we are a two-party system, but and there is a legacy party, but there's also an opposition, and the opposition has had many iterations from 1962 come forward. However, because our politics here is split along ethnicity lines, right? The percentage of both ethnic groups, the two main ethnic groups, I should say, that plays a
Right.
part in terms of support. And so what we've
That's the same in Guyana.
yes, it's very, very similar to Guyana. As a matter of fact, we have persons involved in our politics here in Trinidad and Tobago that is end up being involved in Guyana politics. But
Right.
that's a subject for an entirely different interview. Not this interview. So I was trying to grasp this as trying to get a sense of what kind of support or lack of support the government, your government, was having with respect to measures, and you've cleared it up for me nicely. So now let's get back to that group of persons who don't seem to be quite thrilled about the vaccine or the virus and those things. Do you have an anti-vax sentiment in
Strong.
strong? Where is
Strong.
Where is it coming from? Like, why are Antigua Barbudans deciding that they're anti-vaxxers? Is vaccination mandatory for getting into schools in Antigua Barbuda?
You mean outside of COVID?
Outside of COVID, when you have to
Yes,
enter into
correct.
primary school, do you have to be
Correct.
vaccinated?
That's correct.
So then,
You have to be vaccinated for all kinds of things.
where does the anti-vax sentiment come from within the adult population?
All right. This is just, again, my humble opinion based on my observations. We really have two pandemics. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, and you have the pandemic of misinformation. I think I alluded to it earlier. And because of the politicization of the virus and of the vaccine, particularly coming out of right-wing elements or reactionary elements in the United States, because we consume a lot of American TV, American news. You had a personality, a personality that strode across the stage in the United States for 4 years or 4+ years, because you have to include the campaign. And his whole raison d'etre was misinformation. I think the Washington Post chronicled the number of lies he told from the time he became president, or in the lead up to him becoming president, and the time he left the White House. The man just, I mean, all politicians lie. I think we all know that, you know. But this particular one, he just lied for sport. He lied as though it was his breath. And so himself and the reactionary forces, for whatever reason, maybe they thought it was politically advantageous to them, they were just adamant that this mask wearing, this virus isn't serious. I mean, you heard him say so. You know, by spring, the virus would be gone. You know, he never wore a mask. His lieutenants in the White House, they didn't wear a mask, and we saw the consequence of that, right? Including him. He took the vaccine privately, secretly, but because he knows he engendered, or not engender, engender is not the word I'm looking for, because he knows that he cultivated this anti-vax sentiment in the United States, he didn't want his supporters to know. You understand? I think Jim Jones drank the Kool-Aid when he was down there, right? Or he shot himself. What happened to Jim Jones? You remember?
Jim
I think
Jones's people drank the Kool-Aid. I think Jim may have killed himself. I have to
he
go
may
and
have
check
killed
now.
himself.
I'll have to go and check
But
now.
this fella, I think, whatever, he met his demise. But this fella here, the modern day Jim Jones, he essentially is leading people down a wrong path. But he himself took the vaccine, but yet he did not try to squelch the misinformation that largely came from his circle, that spread the misinformation about the virus and discouraged people from participating in vaccination programs. He didn't take it seriously. I would give credit to him in some respect in that he did fund or put resources aside, but for political purposes, there was just a lot of misinformation in the whole mix. And I think even though it may not, I want to give him some credit, it may not have been his actual intention, but it sort of got out of control. And so we have a lot of people out there who is just adamant about spreading information that some of them know not to be true, but for whatever reason, they are insistent on spreading, whether it's for profit, whether it's for politics. And so we in Antigua, when you hear a lot of the anti-vax folks speak, you hear the same thing you see on Fox News, same thing you see on right-wing American, all the talking points, they have it down to a science. They have it down to a science. And so when I point out to them, well, look at what has happened in the United States, where a lot of the people the states that voted for the former guy, they had a worse time with the pandemic because a lot of them just did not go out and get vaccinated because they absorbed so much of that negativity about the virus and about the vaccine. And so a lot of them here, that is where it has come from. To be fair, there is some historical skepticism because of things that the United States may have done in the past, especially when it comes to people of African descent, using vaccines to, sterilize or to, cause problems in the black community.
Has Antigua Barbuda itself
No.
ever done things like that to its community?
No. And the point you just made about individuals who are anti-vax, but yet their children were vaxxed, they were vaxxed, they had to get a vaccine. I had to ask one of them the other day, but hold on, didn't you get a vaccine to go to school? Don't you take your children to get vaccinated for all kinds of things? And when you push them in that corner, they will say to you, well, this is not a real vaccine, which is another talking point of a lot of the right-wing hosts on American TV. It's not a real vaccine. Really, it's not a real vaccine? Come on now. But that is what they believe. And to be honest with you, I do think that there's some people who really believe this. They don't have an agenda. They don't have the same animus or political goal as some of the folks in the United States, or even here in Antigua, that may have a political objective. They honestly believe that the vaccine is not a real vaccine, or they honestly believe that the vaccine is going to cause population control. If I take the vaccine, I'm going to die in a certain period of time. Or the alternative, which would be if I take the vaccine, it's going to alter my DNA. You've heard it all. And so a lot of this is based on misinformation. And so once there's misinformation, it creates doubt in the minds of people, and people become fearful. And once they become fearful, they're going to be reluctant to go down a particular path. So I don't want to give the impression to your listeners and viewers that all anti-vax people are bad, or there are some people who are not really anti-vax. They're just fearful and skeptical, and they just need to be reassured, or they need more education about it. And I think certainly here in Antigua, the government, I think, recognized it made some mistakes in the early part of this pandemic. Instead of having politicians out there, people are naturally skeptical of politicians. So instead of having politicians out there parading or articulating policy and why this is good and why you should do it, they began to have medical professionals come out, pediatricians, OBGYN specialists, a number of others who came on state TV and on my program and programs like mine to explain to people. And I think it worked. And so the opposition was quick to say, if the government did this in the first place, they wouldn't have had to implement a mandate. People would have been cooperative. It's easy to say now, hindsight is better than 2020. But to answer your question as to why there's such a significant, I think it has a lot to do with what I consider to be the dark prince of misinformation, who fortunately the Americans got rid of last November in the last election, even though he claims he won the election. Which is another lie. But not to digress, I think it just has a lot to do with that and the seeds of misinformation that started from his administration and his general approach to governance generally.
So is that anti-vax or that vaccine hesitancy impacting on your economy? Because your economy is very reliant on tourism, isn't it?
Correct.
So then if you go ahead.
Yeah. The majority of people, I think, here are not anti-vax. But the anti-vax folks are loud, and you get the impression that they, perhaps are more significant than in terms of size or numerically speaking than they really are. I think the majority of people who have not yet taken the vaccine are still just fearful and watching to see what happens, if we're still alive and we don't have, spoons or other metal objects sticking to us, another bit of the misinformation. But I think the majority, because I think right now we have over 60,000 people, 61,000 persons who would have taken the vaccine. I would say that our adult population is around, 75, 80,000, thereabout.
Okay.
So, that's just my.
You are getting close to.
Guesstimating.
We're
getting close.
A significant number of persons vaccinated. What kinds of
Correct.
vaccines do you have which vaccines are you using?
The AstraZeneca, which is the one that's coursing through my veins right now, because that was the only option I had, and my doctor said, Daren, the best vaccine is the best vaccine is the one you have. So we have the AstraZeneca, we have the Sinopharm, which is China. We have the J&J or Janssen vaccine, which I think if at the time I took the vaccine, if it was available, I'd have probably taken that because it's just one shot. And I don't like needles, famously. You have the Pfizer now. We have Pfizer, all right, thanks to the U.S. administration. I think we have an Indian vaccine now.
Okay.
It was just, I can't remember the name. It's a vaccine I'm not terribly familiar with. I'm forgetting one. We had Sputnik.
Yeah, right. I was just
We
going
had
to ask if you have
Sputnik. Sputnik V. So we had Sputnik. So we had a range of vaccines. So if you didn't want to take the Pfizer because you think it's going to alter your DNA, you could have taken the AstraZeneca, or you could have taken Sputnik. Or you could have taken the Chinese because you figured the Chinese may know about COVID because it started there. So you take the Chinese. So those are the options that we have. I think at one point we had like 5 options. And I believe we might get the Moderna sometime soon. I hear some talk about the Moderna coming here, which is the one, incidentally, that the Prime Minister took famously.
Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that bit.
He got a few knocks for that. He got a few knocks for that. But
he got some pound for having taken it quietly and privately. I saw that.
Correct.
So
He did. Mm.
I know that COVID came home to you. You had a personal interaction with the virus in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did it happen? Who's the person that got infected, and how a person or persons, and how did they, how did that entire thing go?
Um, in every family you have you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family,
No, you can't.
right? And you have like society, you have individuals who believe in science, and you have individuals who are skeptical of science, or very skeptical, or extremely skeptical. And if that is cloaked in religiosity or religion, that makes it a bit more entrenched. And so, while the majority of my family was supportive of the vaccine and believes in the vaccine, there were one or two persons who were not. My mother and my stepfather, they don't believe in the vaccine. They think it's not a real vaccine. All the things that I mentioned earlier, that's their thing. And so we had many intense moments of fellowship, shall we say, about this discussion, because myself, along with my siblings, both of whom reside outside of Antigua at the moment, so I'm the only one here to deal with the issues. We all tried to encourage them to get vaccinated, and they refused. Anyway, to cut a long story short, and to answer your question, I had made arrangements for some of the members of my family to get vaccinated. And the plan was for my grandmother to have the mobile unit come to her, because she was 93 years old. I didn't want her to go to a public vaccination center. I know one or two people in Antigua, so they were willing to facilitate, given the circumstance, they were willing to facilitate her being vaccinated. And somehow my mother got wind of it, and she put a stop to it, essentially. My grandmother attended a nursing home during the day. Yeah. And it is my suspicion, I don't know scientifically, I didn't go and swab and have them locked down, but I can't imagine where else she could have possibly gotten it. But she was sick for a few days. She had a temperature. She was not eating, and I suspected that something was amiss. Now, anyone who knows me knows that my grandmother and I were extremely close. I think, for me, she was God in human form. I love my grandmother out of this world. And so I happen to have had a friend who knew something, called me and said, Daren, you should check, how's your grandmother? And I said, well, I don't think she's doing very well. She has a bit of a temperature and she's not eating. And she was the first person who said to me, watch out, because the nursing home may have had an incidence of COVID. So automatically, my suspicions were bolstered. And so when I realized, the fever wasn't breaking, her situation wasn't improving, I had her tested. And sure enough, it was COVID. My grandmother passed away. Next week will make 2 months since my grandmother passed away. And I had to deal with grief, and I had to deal with anger, because in my humble opinion, this should never have happened. When I was advised that my mother had put a stop to my grandmother being vaccinated, I think I would have, out of respect for the hierarchy, I mean, my mother is my grandmother's firstborn. She obviously would be her next of kin, so to speak, and the person in charge of her affairs and all that kind of thing. And so I did not want to usurp my mother's authority, if you understand what I'm saying.
I do understand what you're saying, and
Yeah.
I'm silent here because I want you to tell this story uninterrupted. But there's so many questions in my head. Like when
Yeah.
you hear that your grandmother has a temperature at the nursing home, how do you not get angry at the nursing home? Then when she passes on, because how long how long did it take to escalate to the you know
Um, my grandmother would have been when she tested positive. I think 2 days after that, she went to the hospital for she went to the hospital overnight. But they believed that her oxygen levels were sufficient, that she didn't have to be at the hospital. And the fear was she would not get the level of care because of the number of persons that were on the COVID ward in the emergency room. She would not have gotten the level of care and attention that they know I would want her to have, and the family generally would want her to have. And so she was sent back home. But within days of that, we had to send her back because she was clearly not improving. And so I would say within a span of 2 weeks,
okay.
2.5 weeks.
When she was
She,
sent home, was someone looking after her when she was at home?
yeah, she had someone looking after her.
Okay.
Her sister, her younger sister, and my aunt would have looked after her. And we would all chip in, even though we don't reside in that particular household. So we would have chipped in to assist in whatever way we could. And I had to, of course, at that time, I was second guessing myself. I should have not been so obedient. I should have just said, you know what, to hell with it. I'm going to go and do it. If she vex, she vex. But again, there are two thoughts. One, I don't want to cause a problem or rift in the family because, I mean, I love my mother. I'm inclined to think that she genuinely believes what she believes is true, even though I keep telling her it's BS. I think I told her one time she's a part of a cult. That didn't go down very well, but that's beside the point. Um, and then what if I insisted on getting my grandmother the vaccine and she died? Suppose, because maybe something in the vaccine might have affected her in such a way that she may have died. And I wouldn't be able to live that down. So I decided to just do the best I could under the circumstances, but obviously it was not good enough because, as one of the internists said on state TV, if COVID is in an environment, it looks for the weakest link. And somebody who is not vaccinated, they are the weakest link. And so my grandmother was the weakest link because my understanding is a number of the other persons at the nursing home would have been vaccinated. Not everybody, but the point is COVID went there and she wasn't vaccinated. She was vulnerable, and so this woman, tower of a woman, she did well for herself despite the fact that, I mean, she had her challenges with her husband at the time, my mother's father, and so on. But she still pulled herself up by the bootstraps and made a very good life for herself. And when I came along, I was the son she never had. I was her first grandson, her first grandchild, and she had three, but three of her children were all girls, so she never had a son. So essentially, I'm told, I was like the first son. And she treated me like that. I will admit, they tell me all the time, she spoiled me.
I was about to
You
say
know?
that. You were spoiled,
Yeah.
Daren.
So, I mean, imagine coming into this thing this place called planet Earth. And this person is a constant in your life from the moment you know yourself. And there is nothing that I would have been able to, that I would ask my grandmother for that she did not afford me. You understand? So for me, she was it. And so COVID really did a number on her. she was not able to recover. The first thing a doctor at the hospital asked me, is she vaccinated? Daren, how come she's not vaccinated? And you're on the radio preaching every day for people to get vaccinated. How is it that your own grandmother is not vaccinated? They don't know the story. They don't know the conflict. You understand? And so that too was a struggle for me. People are going to question my integrity. How is it that I'm preaching people go and take vaccine and your precious grandmother, you didn't see to it that she got vaccinated? You see how difficult this has been?
What is the
And so,
relationship like with you and your mom now? I mean, like, how have you all been able to work?
I would say right now it's good. I mean, there was a moment in time when I let my mother know exactly what I thought about her decision. So she is not under any illusion about how I feel about her decision. But as a close friend of mine said to me, and because I have a background of faith, which has been challenged very recently, obviously.
I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah. Forgiveness is not for the object of forgiveness. The forgiveness is for the person doing the forgiving. And at the same time, too, I have to recognize and accept the fact. I mean, my mother is a loving, God-fearing woman, and I don't want to think that she would obviously know or believe that the vaccine would have done something good and withhold it from my grandmother. If you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
We may not, or some people may not understand it because, but I genuinely believe that my mother thought she was doing the best thing for my grandmother. And so that helps me to process my feelings. Because at the end of the day, she is my mother.
Yes.
And two, she is the firstborn child of my grandmother. So she too would have had her own grief and her own struggle.
Have you and your mom been able to have that conversation about the loss that both of you feel, the loss that you are feeling, the loss that she is feeling, and the guilt even? Because both of you must be feeling, I mean, you've said that you're feeling guilty, and your mom must be feeling guilty as well.
Yeah. My mother is not one for showing too much emotion. And I think it's a protective mechanism, if you will. And she did explain to me why she is the way she is. She said to me, Daren, this is why I'm the way I am. And I can appreciate and put that in context. So we have had a sit down where she spoke about certain things. She hasn't come out and said, I admit I was wrong and I'm sorry. But you know that she feels a sense of remorse and sorrow for what has happened. And for me, I have to accept that. You understand? Because I don't want, I've heard of people who've not spoken to their mother, not spoken to their father, and then they die and then they live with regret and pain and deal with those demons. I can't do that. Life is too short, obviously. But to add a little twist to the story, 2 days after my grandmother was put in the ground, and by the way, just to tell the part of the story, my grandmother, there is a picture on my iPhone that I took, a screenshot of the last image that I have of my grandmother alive. Fortunately, a doctor was able to call me and I was able to video link with my grandmother. It was the most painful phone call I've ever had in my entire life.
What transpired in that phone call, Daren?
The doctor, basically, before he put me on to her, he just said to me, Daren, there really isn't much more they can do because of the invasive nature of COVID and what it does to the lungs. It's essentially pneumonia on steroids. Huh? So she was essentially struggling to breathe, and the lungs were essentially being taken over by, the symptoms, the effects of COVID. And he just said, you may just want to say, your final words to your grandmother. Now, as I spoke to her, her eyes were partially open. But in that moment, I knew my grandmother was slipping away from me. And I bawled like a child.
I could well imagine.
This was just incredibly difficult. And I think the last thing I said to my grandmother, of course, we all, myself, my wife, my children, we all told her we love her. Mm-hmm. We adore her. And I said to her, I hope that, she has to pull through this, because I want her to be able to come by me again on a Sunday and eat what we call fungi. It's a cornmeal ball.
Yeah, it's
fungi.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what we have here called pay me. Yeah.
Right. I think the Ghanaians call it fufu. Every island has their own thing. But essentially, she loves, whenever she comes by, and we usually alternate who takes care of her on the weekend. And on Sundays, when she comes by us, my dear wife will prepare fungi for her with whatever it is we're eating. She just loves fungi, and it's one of the things that she would eat all of, And so I said to her, Gran, you need to come back by me to eat fungi. So please, you got to pull through this. But in my heart, I knew that my grandmother was slipping away from me to meet her maker. And I had to resign myself to that fact, as difficult as it was, because she would have been suffering. She would have been obviously going through this virus that was ravaging her body and her lungs in particular. And the best medicine, the best doctors and the best hospitals in the world have not been able to bring people back from that point. So I knew my grandmother was going, and I didn't want to be selfish. I wanted her to be free. And so this whole, it's a very complex situation that I am in, because I am grieving the loss of my dear grandmother. And I'm trying to quell the rage against the decision-making processes that led to this, in my view. Because it didn't have to be like this. My grandmother lived an honorable life. She made her contributions. She raised her children, and in large part raised her grandchildren. And she deserved a better end. And she would have turned 94 last week, Friday, the 12th of November. And the feelings are still raw. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm just bawling down. I mean, I think my wife kind of woke up partially. I had to go outside because I was just crying, because here it is. My grandmother's not here to celebrate her 94th birthday. And to me, it was just so unfair, in my view. But it is what it is. And 2 days after, just 2 days, she died the Monday. And by the Wednesday, we had to bury her. So I didn't even get a chance to process. And this is what COVID does. This is what COVID does. So when people out there spout their nonsense about COVID isn't real and the vaccine is not a real vaccine, the members of my family who took the vaccine, she's very much.
He's gonna have to come back in. I'm sure he's gonna call back in. But for those of you who've only just arrived, we're chatting with Daren Matthew-Ward from Antigua. Hi, Daren.
We ran out of time.
No. We did not run out of time. I think there might have been some sort of glitch, but you're back
Okay.
in, and we can continue. So you were talking about the fact that this is what COVID does to you. She died on
Yeah.
the Monday. She had to be buried by the Wednesday, and you did not have time to process the loss.
No, I and that so it this has just been a nightmare on several levels, and it's only because of a certain level of maturity, the support of my wife and my children, and I have very good friends who've been, very supportive, why I've been able to keep it together. And I, I came back out to work fairly quickly. I just tried to bury myself in what I do, because if I allowed myself not to do that, I don't know, I might have, maybe these negative feelings might have overpowered me, and I don't think she would want that. I think she would want me to continue, and I think she would want me to preach the gospel about vaccines and about the importance of science. God has given us, well, however you perceive God to be, the Almighty, whatever deity one believes in, has given us extremely gifted scientists and extremely gifted medical professionals who've gone to school for countless years to perfect their craft. Vaccination is a science that's been around for over a century. I don't know why some people think they can watch a YouTube video, watch Fox News or these other reactionary news polluters, and all of a sudden become experts and know more than the virologists, or know more than the doctors, or know more than the scientists. I can't accept that. And so therefore, in memory of my grandmother, I think that I have a responsibility to anyone who I could persuade and encourage to act responsibly. If you have doubts and fears about the vaccine, speak to your medical professional. And if your medical professional gives you the go-ahead, take the vaccine. Because the life you save may not even be your own, but it may be somebody who you love. Yeah.
Your mom, is your mom
Yeah.
coming around to the idea of getting vaccinated?
Well, she actually caught COVID.
Really?
Yes. She caught COVID 2 days after my grandmother was buried. She started to display symptoms, and the children my sisters, all of us, the children, pressured her to get tested. She didn't want to get tested, right? She didn't want to get tested.
Oh, wow.
But she eventually, I think that was one of the moments where I got angry with her, and I said to her a few things, which I won't say now. And the next morning she messaged and said, okay, she will, So we got her to do the test, and sure enough, she was positive. Fortunately, some people will get the COVID and the symptoms are mild, and others get it and it knocked them down. Fortunately, thank God, my mother did not have the symptoms that my grandmother did, for example. And so, of course, at that point in time, I had to be a son. So I'm still grieving,
And
but
you're
I have a
angry.
responsibility.
You're grieving,
And
you're
I'm
angry,
angry.
and you have to
I'm grieving when I'm angry.
and you have to care.
But I had to put all that aside because this was the bigger picture. My mother was not well, and she obviously had to be in quarantine. So guess who had to be the one to make sure she had what she needed?
You.
Yeah, exactly, because my sisters are not here. They're coming soon, though. because we're having a memorial for my grandmother in December. So they're coming soon, and we're all going to have a sit down with our mother. Because I tell them I'm not doing this on my own anymore. Because she had COVID, it's not advised that she get the vaccine right now. So I have not approached the subject. But I'm pretty sure that when she has gone through her, 3 months, two and a half, 3 months, whatever period of
Yeah, it's
time they
about
say,
2.5 to 3 months.
right, we're going to have a conversation. And I don't know that I'm going to be as mild-mannered and patient and tolerant because I do not wish to endure this again. I do not wish to endure this again. So that is how COVID has impacted my family. And to be honest, I think there were some strains. There were some angry conversations. There was a lot of tension between the family because, of course, people would have been blaming and upset with and so on. But I think we are trying our best to keep it together because we really have each other only. We have to keep it together. And as I said, I mean, it's my mother. I only have one mother. Well, we all only have one mother. And so you have to put things into perspective. And I think what has really helped me is the fact that I really do believe that my mother thought she was doing the best thing. Because and just to punctuate my point, that is the danger of misinformation. That people can be listening to nonsense and believe it is gospel.
And think they're doing the right thing.
And think they're doing the right thing. Honestly. But totally missing the mark and causing lives.
Yeah. Daren, on behalf of my audience and myself, I want to say deepest condolences to you and thank you so much for sharing your story with us this evening.
Thank you.
I felt it was, after having had that chat with you early on in the week, I felt it was important for my audience to hear your story, especially with what is going on here with us, because I feel like in Trinidad and Tobago, we're not understanding what we see the figures 2,060 deaths, and I don't think it has hit us. I don't think it has come home to us what that figure means. And it means that we have lots of persons here that are going through the same range of emotions that you are currently going through for one reason or another.
Yeah.
So, and
this is the challenge of our time. This is the
yeah,
challenge of our time.
Is. And you are so right when you say that it's not just a pandemic of the virus, it's also a pandemic of misinformation. There is so much misinformation going on right now, and it's leading to the loss of life. So if it was a situation where the misinformation wasn't impacting on lives, perhaps I would feel a little bit more tolerant of it, but it's leading to deaths. And it's, and it's ridiculous that what we have to deal with in terms of the loss of life. And we're also demoralizing our health sector. You have all of these professionals out there working themselves, hard to keep people safe, to help people recover. And you have people that are willfully spreading misinformation. That has to be a demoralizing thing. So I want to thank you for your time. I took way more time than I thought I was going to take, but I
talked too much?
No. You talked just enough. We thoroughly enjoyed the overview you gave us of what took place in Antigua and Barbuda, and helping us to understand things, and of course your personal story. So I'm going to let you go and spend the rest of your Friday evening the way you normally like to spend the rest of your Friday evening.
Thank you.
And we will
thank you.
We will be in touch, right? We will
yes,
be in
we will.
touch. All right.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that even 1-2 persons will go and get themselves vaccinated.
Great.
Get vaccinated.
I hope so too. Get vaccinated, folks.
Right.
Thank you.
And don't worry about this new variant. Just go and get vaccinated.
Oh my goodness. We'll talk about this new variant another time.
Yes, you will.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, Daren.
Have a good night. To the good people of Trinidad and Tobago. I love Trinidad. It's been a while since I've been. I'm looking forward to coming back soon.
Yeah, let me know as soon as you're going to be here so we can hang out in person.
You bet.
Yeah. Oh,
we can have some shark and bake.
Shark and bake.
Or bake and shark. Yeah, whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Whichever one comes first.
We will be having it. All right. Take care,
All right.
Daren. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
So that was my friend, media personality in Antigua Barbuda, and he also works in the health insurance sector for the last 23 years. Daren Matthew-Ward, and I really wanted you to hear his story and to understand precisely how serious this whole business of the virus and getting vaccinated is. That it is a life and death issue for many persons, and this isn't something that we should be, taken lightly at all, because the misinformation surrounding the virus and surrounding the vaccines has led to deaths. So I will see you all on Sunday. I hope you all enjoyed the program this evening. Take care.